Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We're your two dark knights of dorkery, your vigilantes of verified tidbits, your nocturnal ninjas of nigh-on incomprehensible minutia. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh, and that is an all-time intro for you, my friend. Wow.
This is my...
It's your Super Bowl.
This is my Waterloo. No, yes, this is my, God, what was the one that you probably nerded out the most recently over?
Revolver, probably.
Yeah, this is my Revolver.
Yeah.
Today, Jordan, we are talking about one of the towering achievements of the ever-widening gyre of comic book adaptations, the show that provided a valuable way station for fans caught in a drought of big screen versions, and a vision of the titular hero that has outlasted bigger and more expensive versions across the decades. That's right, we're talking about Batman the Animated Series. Da-na-na-na-na-na. With the recent passing of Kevin Conroy, the beloved voice of Batman and Bruce Wayne on that show, and more other Batman-related properties than you could shake a batarang at, I dug out my bat suit and I cornered Jordan in a darkened alley to force him to let us do this episode.
Were you ever Batman for Halloween? I feel like this has got to be...
No, actually, I wasn't. No.
Too much respect for the uniform? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to steal valor from Batman. No, I was Spider-Man one year.
Yeah.
I would describe this as probably one of the big four of sort of animated comic book properties of the late 80s, 90s. I mean, obviously we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I think everyone forgets was a comic first, but that gets grandfathered in. The Fox X-Men, which is also, man, dude, that theme song is an all-time banger. And Spider-Man, which was, I think, kind of a bit later, but, you know, also long-running and kind of in that Fox animated slot. I'm sure people would count Superman in there, but Superman's sucks, so we don't talk about him.
Yeah, you really don't like Superman. Is
so
this
boring.
a Beatles Stones thing or what?
Yes, actually, that is probably the dichotomy. Superman is the wholesome one, and Batman is the dark one. And, I don't know, dude, Superman's just boring. It's like the kid who... like when you're like playing with a kid and they keep like inventing like things that they can do on the fly, like, well, my guy can shoot lasers and he's also the strongest guy and also he can fly and also he can
leap over tall buildings.
Yeah, it's just so boring. And he's I think people have done more interesting things with the character. Like, you know, there's like an extended like riff on Superman as like an immigrant, which is kind of interesting, it's just so deadly dull. Like, he's virtuous and he has powers and like he's the most strong guy. Just boring. And so there's those big ones. And it's interesting, this series really like picked up the slack between movies because you had Tim Burton doing Batman and Batman Returns, which are like the highest grossing. That original Batman like blew the doors off everything. And then Batman Returns is one of the most like beloved sequels of all time, not even in the superhero genre, just like period. It's like the Godfather 2 of superhero movies. And then there was nothing for a long time. And, I think someone will probably correct me on this, but I think Tim Burton was working on a Superman with Nicolas Cage. And you can actually find like shots of Nicolas Cage in a Superman costume out there that are really bad. And then that got derailed. And then the next one was Batman Forever. And that was the Schumacher era that pretty much killed the franchise dead within 2 years and 2 movies. Although Batman Forever gave us Kiss by a Rose. Yeah, man, I was just the perfect age for this. You know, like the Tim Burton stuff are like, it's such a great vision, but it is like, it's dark and like not necessarily for kids. And we'll get into like how this show sort of was also pushing the tonal envelope. But yeah, dude, like Danny DeVito's like scary. He like bites a dude's nose and he's like oozing black ooze out of his mouth all the time. It's just horrifying. And so like the Saturday morning version of this is so just like what I grew up in and so like it has such a unique vision of the look, and Kevin Conroy is just perfect, man. I mean, he's like, that's like my Batman. I was already like old when the Christian Bale version came out, and obviously those are great, and Heath Ledger is, you know, incredible in that role, but it's like this was like the Batman I grew up with. And like when I hear Batman's voice in my head, as I frequently do, it's Kevin Conroy's.
Life has no meaning.
Yes. I'm guessing, though, that you are dispositionally perhaps a little more predisposed to, let's say, the Adam West version.
Yeah,
and I don't mean that as shade, because I also grew up on that.
I love my mid-century pop art. Yeah, I mean, Adam West was really just one of the only Batmans, is that the plural? Batman I. Yeah, Batman I. That I can really just name off the top of my head. I don't know. Something about the movies, they just seem like stunt casting to me. Like, that's not Batman. That's George Clooney cosplaying as Batman.
Oh, those, the Schumacher ones, for sure.
Well, bad example, but I mean, yeah.
Well, the backlash to the Burton ones is so interesting because, you know, I think he pretty much cast Keaton off the strength of Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
And then, but people were like, who's this?
He's a comedian.
Yeah.
My knowledge of Batman, and this will become devastatingly apparent very soon, is non-existent. I mean, comics in general, sorely lacking. But I'm really excited to learn a lot from you today because I know this is a subject very near and dear to your heart. I'm shocked you haven't mentioned this yet, so I will. Years ago, not long after we first met, Heigl invited me to join his band. Not because I had any innate musical talent. He just knew.
Oh, that's not true.
He just knew I had a bass and was available. And the name of that band was The World's Greatest Detective, which was a phrase that meant absolutely nothing to me at the time. In fact, I thought you just were really into Sherlock Holmes. I'm serious. But I gradually pieced together that it was a reference to Batman, and it slowly dawned on me what a major figure he was in your life.
Well, probably you saw the Batman tattoo that I have.
No.
No, I've got a Batman tattoo. I was in the running for an editor job at DC Comics for a few months, and I think that tattoo kept me in the running. And sadly, it never materialized. But that was a great interview that I went on, just like ranting to like 2 DC Comics editors about how much I love Batman. They were like, "Well, what about like the other stuff, like our entire roster of other comics?" And I was like, no. Probably hurt me a little bit.
But I mean, I love talking about this with you because in a classic hallmark of male friendships, we've never actually discussed your love of Batman. Yeah. So I'm excited to learn from you and hear what he means to you. Because as I said, this is a huge blind spot for me, especially the animated series. Really, sort of in classic form for me, the only Batman that I actually ever studied up on was the original comic from 1939, just because I did a story on it for People a few years back for the 80th anniversary. That's where I learned that DC Comics stood for Detective Comics, hence The World's Greatest Detective. Didn't know that. I didn't know that Bruce Wayne is supposed to be a descendant of the Revolutionary War general Mad Anthony Wayne, which rules. But yeah, that's the level of my Batman scholardom. So I'm excited to learn. Teach me, Zorba.
Is that a Zorba the Greek reference?
Yes, it is. He's now in the Batman extended universe, Zorba the Greek.
That's canon.
Yeah.
Well, from Kevin Conroy's youth as a Juilliard-trained actor who once roomed with Robin Williams and almost Superman, the second act, to the second act it provided to Star Wars icon Mark Hamill, to the dizzyingly sophisticated imagery that went into the look of the show. Here's everything you didn't know about Batman, the animated series. All right. Well, bizarrely enough,
but you got to read the heading. You got to read the heading.
Oh yeah, all of these are Batman riffs. This first one is Holy Development Process Batman. God, have you ever gone through the whole list of all the Robin catchphrases?
I think we did on this show once, but I couldn't for the life of me tell you why.
We did. My favorite is the Holy Shark Repellent Bat Spray Batman.
What episode would that have possibly been for? I have no idea.
That was one of the ones I had taped because I remember it. They're climbing a ladder that's suspended from a helicopter. It's actually a crazy sequence considering it was done for a 60s television show. And it's stuntmen, obviously, but they're both dangling on this ladder because they've been hoisted up from the ocean. And there's a shark hanging onto Batman's legs. So he pulls out the shark repellent bat spray. I think the shark explodes.
See, this is why the Adam West era is kind of more my
so
thing.
great. Zap, pow, bam. The Bat-watusi. God, okay, we have to stay on track. The origins of Batman the Animated Series lie not with murdered parents, but with Tiny Toon adventures.
Almost as traumatic.
Specifically, a Batman spoof that was part of that show called Bats All Folks, which was a parody that saw the character of Plucky Duck assume the mantle of Spruce Vane, Bat Duck, medium funny. It was for children. It was a different time. The Warner Brothers Animation television division around this time, late 80s, early 90s, was established by WB Animation president Gene McCurdy. And she brought in a producer named Tom Ruger and a lot of his staff from Hanna-Barbera Productions' Scooby-Doo series. Tiny Toon Adventures, which, for the uninitiated, is like baby versions of the Looney Tunes.
Babs and Buster Bunny. No relation.
Yeah. And that was a big hit for them. It was their first big success. And that short contained a number of very loving and deeply specific Batman references, like lines of dialogue that they lifted from the very first comic, recreation of imagery from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, which is very inappropriate for children. But it's probably one of the more iconic images of the series. It's like Batman silhouetted on a building with like lightning flashing behind him, which they also riff in the animated series in the opening credits. And those were the work of one guy named Bruce Timm, who was not one of the show's regular animators, but he was on this episode, and he started his career with like stuff like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, and then he also worked for Ralph Bakshi and Don Bluth on Secret of Nim. We really got to slot in a Bluth episode.
Yeah. Well, they're all too sad. They're all too sad and too scary. Land Before Time is too sad. Secret of Nim is too scary. All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Traumatizing.
Yeah.
He also worked with future Ren and Stimpy head honcho John Kricfalusi on Mighty Mouse, and he worked on The Real Ghostbusters. And then he joined Warner Brothers in '89, which was the year before Tiny Toon Adventures launched. And Bruce Timm had wrapped the first season on that show when McCurdy called a meeting, and she was like, hey, Warner Brothers, we're going to be expanding the slate. Tiny Toons was a hit, the slate of animated properties. And Tim Burton's first Batman movie had been such a world-conquering success in '89. And so they were like, we're going to do Batman. Or that's one of the ones we're looking at anyway. And Bruce Timm was so excited, and he got out of the meeting and went back to his desk and in a fit of pique swept all of his Tiny Toon Adventures stuff off his desk and started working on Batman.
Attaboy.
And, some of the visual influences of this show, he was looking at Sleeping Beauty, the Disney version that sort of has this pared down, angular, more simplistic style. And then the Hanna-Barbera 60s stuff like Space Ghost, which you can really see the kind of like lantern jaw of the characters and these trapezoidal torsos that everyone has.
Those backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty are incredible.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah. Very un-Disney. Like, I'm sort of amazed that it's like way too cool for Disney. I'm amazed that they got away with that.
He drew 20 different versions of Bruce Wayne before he landed on the one. And that was a combination of Doc Savage, who's this sort of forgotten comic character from the mid-century, and Dick Tracy.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And McCurdy loved the designs that he brought to the next staff meeting, and she paired him with a guy named Eric Radomski, who had also been working on Tiny Toons as a background painter. And the two of them didn't really work together. This is Bruce Timm talking to Vulture for this incredible oral history they did of the show in 2017. He said, we weren't really thrown together a bunch before they were put on this series together. But he said, once we were on the Batman project, we really hit it off. And there's another short piece about this in a magazine called Back Issue. And to them, Tim explained that Warner Brothers had been in negotiations with Fox Kids to actually do the show, and the negotiations had been dragging on for a while. And Gene thought that this might be a good way to kind of goose the process to show them some footage. And she recommended that they look at these 1940 Superman cartoons for inspiration for the look of this show. And they got to work on this pitch reel, which essentially became the opening credits for the show. But it took them 90 days to put this thing together. And the show was greenlit in the meantime, sight unseen. So, and then she was basically like in a classic case of like, hey, you did this thing well. Now you're in charge of it. Like, she was like, you guys are in charge of this show now. And they had never done this before. They were completely new to running an animated show from the top down. There's a great book on the animated series that I relied on a lot of this, has a lot of the beautiful animation storyboards and stuff. And but things pretty much immediately hit a snag. Tim writes in the intro of the book that there was a story editor for the show that was initially assigned to them, and they immediately got into battles. They basically thought the scripts weren't up to snuff, and the story editor, quite rightly, felt that two artists with zero experience should be giving her such strong feedback on her work. And he wrote, "Certainly egos were bruised and toes were stepped on. There's no getting around the fact that we were pretty damn brash and outspoken. I recently came across some old script notes from those days in my files and was positively aghast at how snotty and mean-spirited I sounded." Which, who among us? Gene McCurdy shut down production. And Bruce Timm told Vulture, "There was a period in the early couple of months of production where literally Eric and I didn't know if we were going to show up and find the locks changed on our offices." And part of this was that from the beginning that they were aiming for this darker look and tone for this show, more akin to the Tim Burton films than the Adam West version. And, it's really to her credit that Gene McCurdy took this leap of faith on them, but she brought in a buddy of hers, Alan Burnett, who told Vulture that he was basically upset after years of dealing with like standards and practices and networks, because he'd been working on the Smurfs and DuckTales for years. And he was trying to get out of children's animation altogether. He was just trying to leave the field entirely. But he told Vulture, "What sold me was the trailer that Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski had done for the show. I said to Gene, listen, if you're going to do Batman, you're going to have guns and fistfights, both of which were completely verboten in children's animation at the time. And that's when she showed me the trailer. I really didn't believe that I would be allowed to have guns and fistfights, but she insisted that I would have the freedom, and so I came on over."
So Alan Burnett brought in writer-producer Paul Dini, and the team sat down to create a 150-page show Bible for the series that laid out their vision. And
I love show Bibles.
they're
so
pretty fun.
fun.
And Dini was writing with an eye towards, like, as you mentioned, the seriously dark Batman stories that had come out in the mid-'80s, like Frank Miller's aforementioned The Dark Knight Returns and Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. And they laid down 3 ground rules for the series. I love this so much. No aliens, no ghosts, and no Humanitas Prize. And that's an award that was established by a priest with a Catholic production company that recognized the most emotional, heartfelt, maudlin, in other words, storytelling in film and television. And just for comparison, MASH had won the most of these awards for its preachy later era episodes. Among the additional rules, Batman works alone, although this changed in the second season when Fox wanted to include Robin as a young character to capitalize on the toy market. And also, Batman does not work with the police. Don't go to the police.
Hell yes.
You and I are both Sicilian. We know this. And this is where the little bit that I know about Batman history comes into play here. Batman initially started off as a detective. I mean, this was a world's greatest detective. This was DC Comics, Detective Comics. And they initially brought in the Robin character. The editors were extremely skeptical, but they brought him in just to kind of have a character that could be the kids' point of view, that readers could kind of glom onto. And in the 50s, there was, I'm sure you know the name for it, I don't offhand, there was basically a big crackdown on comics. Again, this was in McCarthy era, all sorts of crackdown on everything. The Comics Code, where... Yeah. Basically, Batman went from fighting the mob and using guns to fighting these way out characters like, the
Polka
Joker,
Dot Man,
Polka Dot Man,
Two-Face,
really all the crazy ones that we think of, especially towards the Adam West, where it becomes like, real pop art type stuff. So this is sort of more akin to where Batman started as a detective back in the early comic book era.
Yeah, and people always think about like, oh, he works with Commissioner Gordon and stuff, and it's like, well, not really. He kind of involves Commissioner Gordon when he wants to, and that's what their whole thing with the animated show. They were like, he uses the bat signal when they want to work together, but they were like, no. It's so funny. All this history of animation, like all the really good properties, are like adult men who are like, we don't want to make something for children. We want to make something for ourselves. But that's the thing, is that when you don't pander, you create something that's actually good and lives on. And that's what, like, the unifying theme in all of these different properties that we've talked about. Like, it's just people working from their gut and their heart, trying to make something that, trying to make something that's good and doesn't pander.
Wow.
You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
I don't know the reference.
Jordan? Oh, that's what. Okay, so in the original Batman with the Burton one, that's what they retcon it so that the Joker is the thief who killed Batman's parents, and that's his catchphrase. And he says it right before he shoots Batman's parents, and that's how Batman realizes that the Joker is the one who did it. And it's Nicholson, Jack Nicholson, obviously. So he really makes a meal out of that line.
I was reading today. Sorry, I'll probably cut this. Some Jon Stewart joke where he said, "Yeah, Hollywood is really just a series of parties with a velvet rope, with a smaller party in the back, with another velvet rope, with a smaller party beyond that, and another velvet rope, and eventually you just get to one room where it's Jack Nicholson sitting by himself."
In sunglasses.
Yeah, having a party alone.
The team leaned into a style of art that they termed dark deco, which was partially inspired by Burton's sort of like gothic vision. Yeah, it's awesome. Partially inspired by Burton's gothic vision of Batman. I mean, his big thing was German expressionism, like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari stuff, but also these like, Gotham looks like a cathedral. It has all these crazy spires and it's just ridiculous looking. But they wanted a cleaner look. Eric Radomski told Vulture, "We wanted it to be a little more stylish and a little classier, so we leaned away from just horror and gothic, and we leaned more into the deco elegance in the 40s in New York. That birthed this timeless feel where it felt very authentic in a 40s setting, but it was contemporary storylines that we were telling. We could see mobsters and 40s vehicles and dirigibles, and yet Batman had technology that was way beyond that time period. I don't think there's a bat blimp, but
that would rule.
There should be.
Did you ever see Little Nemo? That animated movie from, I think it was based on a Japanese illustrated book. And there's a dirigible in it. And the movie's scary as hell.
Some of the non-comics visual influences that they picked included The Big Sleep, noir, detective noir classic, The Third Man, Orson Welles' non-Citizen Kane masterpiece, The Night of the Hunter, which is have you ever seen Night of the Hunter?
Long time ago, yeah.
That's where Spike Lee got the good and evil riff from Do the Right Thing.
Tattoos?
Yeah. Robert Mitchum is the bad guy in that. He's terrifying. And that movie is just has these beautiful, stark black and white shots. I mean, it almost looks like kabuki theater or something. It's like there's these scenes where he's just like holding these poses that are just shot in these beautiful, stark. There's also this horrifying shot where, spoiler alert, he's murdered this woman and put her in a car that he runs into the bottom of the lake, and there's this horrifying shot of her at the bottom of the lake with her throat cut and her hair waving in the water.
And like the fisherman's line going above it.
Yeah. How did you get that in movie theaters at the time?
Yeah.
And Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is always another, when people talk about this era of like black and white expressionist influence stuff, that's another one that always comes up. You've almost certainly seen the shot of the female robot like seated in a big throne with all the crazy lighting and stuff behind it. And then they also liked Akira, which anyone working in animation had probably been fallen under the spell of Akira, which came out in 88. It's probably, I mean, there'll probably be some people who will correct me on this, but I would argue it's like the Citizen Kane of anime. It's got like one of the broadest cross-cultural impacts of any Japanese animation product outside of the Miyazaki stuff, I would say. I'm a bit of a dilettante when it comes to anime, so someone will angrily tweet at us about that.
It's interesting to me that, I mean, two things that you mentioned are very big influences on David Bowie: Kabuki theater in his Ziggy Stardust era, and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the German expressionist film. He actually used images from that movie in his 1974 Diamond Dogs tour, which was this big, like basically a Broadway musical style tour that I think only lasted halfway through the tour before they were just like, this is just too much. And then he scaled it down. But yeah, so many influences on Batman influenced Bowie. We are working towards a unified Bowie Batman universe here. Wow.
He should have played Batman.
Bowie? Oh, man. He definitely should have been. I could see him as a pretty good Joker.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. In his Coke era.
Oh my God!
Not like impish elder statesman Bowie.
No, not like, extras Bowie. We're talking
coked out Bowie. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
The literal fabric of this show was dark, speaking of all the background animation. Whereas traditional animation uses white background paper, Radomski wanted the series drawn on true black background paper in order to achieve the darker look they wanted, which kept the deep, vibrant tones they use for coloring from looking, too cartoonish. He told Vulture, "I don't recall anyone ever doing that, other than maybe Mary Blair experimenting with some Disney short films." Yeah, she was I think she worked on Sleeping Beauty. "What we were doing was literally trying to interpret the night with an impressionist style." That's incredible. "If we did it wrong, it was going to look like the black velvet paintings that were popular in the 60s and 70s. Yep. Bruce Timm added in this Vulture interview, "I'd worked on a bunch of action-adventure shows for TV before, and every single one of them, I thought, was over-designed. They were trying to impress people with the amount of detail. On G.I. Joe especially, it wasn't enough to draw a belt on a character. The belt had seams and buttons and snaps and pockets. There's no good reason to draw every shoelace on a shoe. Just make it a simple shape. That was Eric and my basic idea for the entire series, to simplify everything."
There's a famous sort of controversial comics artist from the 90s named Rob Liefeld, who is famous for two things. One is his inability to draw feet. And so, like, all of his characters are these horrifically over-muscled steroid nightmares that don't even have a semblance of anatomical reality. And the women are all, like, horrific caricatures of femininity with, like, these tiny wasp waists. And, like, 70% of his action scenes all have these perspective shots where, like, the over-muscled torsos and enormous guns are all foregrounded, and then they taper into these tiny little ballerina feet that are more often than not obscured behind, like, a rock or something. And it's just become, like, a running rip on him that just, like, he can't draw feet. And his other thing was pouches. Extraneous pouches, like pouches around the thigh, like not just a utility belt, but like pouches around biceps and thighs and calves. It's just ridiculous. That simplicity extended to the show's pitch perfect opening, which, if you know nothing about this show, just go look at the opening credits. They're gorgeous. Although each episode's title is displayed in these beautiful 1940s movie theater style, like, lobby cards, like every episode title, and they're all like pulpy. Like the very first episode where Batman fights his polar inverse, Man-Bat, which is a half man, half bat monster. It's called On Leather Wings, which is so awesome. But these opening credits, there's no title. You don't see the word Batman or animated or series anywhere. It's this beautiful film to a variation of the Burton theme, and then you get these title cards. And so there's a great article on that opening sequence to this website, The Art of the Title, and Tim said that was very much by design. He said, "We figured anybody in any language would be able to look at these credits and go, oh, it's Batman. We want expository information conveyed as visually as possible, stressing visual shorthand over lazy expository speeches." That's from the show Bible. "Keep the images and actions clear and vivid." And then there's a guy who directed some of these, and he was a storyboard artist. His name is Kevin Altieri, and he's talking to Back Issue. He says, "The real difficulty was in the layouts, because in the character layouts, you hire people with experience in layouts, and at that time, everyone was just doing goofy, funny, wacky cartoons. If people had drawn action-adventure, they hadn't done it for a long time. Part of the reason the early shows looked so good was that we had total control over the layouts. It was done totally in-house." And those were the backgrounds were the work of a guy named Ted Blackman, who's a real unsung hero of these shows. And he was also a Tiny Toon Adventure alum. It will never not be funny to me that these guys came over from Tiny Toon Adventures. And the look of this show is, again, these really bold, striking colors that are done on these dark backgrounds. And a funny thing that once you're cued into the visual language of the show that you can pick up on is that the shadows move independently of light sources. So, like, they're just these enormous, like, swaths of dark shadow and, like, spotlight lighting that just do not obey the laws of physics. But they used airbrushes to color these backgrounds, and so they're these really oversaturated palette, and then that'll kind of taper off into the patented sort of airbrush diffuse texture. And then to differentiate the backgrounds versus the foregrounds, they would use, like, sponges or deliberately get kind of more splatter textures from the airbrushes. It's just such a sophisticated visual language. This next section is titled Ein klein Bat Musik. Bach music. Not like Bach, but like bat. Get it?
That's good. I liked it.
Okay. The show's main theme that I sang earlier beautifully is based on Danny Elfman's theme from the Tim Burton movies. But I would like to shine a spotlight on the woman who did the bulk of the work on the show, Shirley Walker. She's a prodigiously talented composer and pianist. She played with the San Francisco Symphony when she was a teenager. And she got her start in Hollywood in 1979 playing synths on the score of Apocalypse Now. This is asinine. I didn't know this. This took until 1992 for a female composer to earn a solo composer credit on a major Hollywood motion picture. And that was for a depressingly shitty movie, my beloved John Carpenter's Chevy Chase starring Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which is part of Chase's Downward Slide, and Carpenter's for that matter. Sorry, JC, please forgive me. He would murder me if he heard me say that.
I feel like he would agree.
No, he's. I think he's very he's very cued into the fact that Hollywood sort of did him dirty. But you know, there's a really funny clip of someone being like at a comic convention of somebody being like, "Escape from New York was great. What happened with Escape from L.A.?" And he just gives him the finger and yells, "F you." And it's funny because Carpenter notoriously does a lot of his scoring himself to save money. At least in the early days, it was to save money. But he would collaborate with her again on the aforementioned movie Escape from L.A., which is a film in which Kurt Russell and Peter Fonda surfboard together on a tidal wave through Los Angeles.
Is that how they get out of L.A.? Or I guess I don't know if they escape or
they
not.
They get through part of L.A.
Okay.
Yeah. It's bad, dude. It's scored to Ventures, surf guitar. It's so
Is it meant to be funny?
Who's to say?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Doesn't Shirley Walker do the scoring by hand?
Yeah, she does her own engraving. She did her own engraving by hand.
Oh my God.
Wild. I mean, all these people work with teams, and there were a lot of composers credited on this show, but you know, she did the bulk of this thing. There's an incredible video that everyone should look up where she's seated at a piano doing an interview, and she plays that main theme, da na 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 na, and then harmonizes it, and then shows all the different variations that it goes through, like a rising. It's all these composition terms, like you invert it, which means you play it upside down, or you retrograde it, you play it backwards. And so there's all these rising and falling themes that she harmonizes in different ways, or talks about how they would orchestrate really busy strings running over it. And she's just sitting at a keyboard, ripping all of this stuff off the top of her head as she talks about it. It's amazing. And she came to the showrunner's attention because she was working on Danny Elfman on the TV series The Flash, which is something I know nothing about. I guess there was a Flash TV series that predated the current running one. And she was actually Elfman's conductor on Batman and also Scrooged. And supposedly, this is an interview that I heard. She put this in an interview when they were scoring Batman in London. She said it was a record at the time for the most recording sessions for any score for a motion picture. I was unable to verify that, but I believe her.
Any movie ever, not just her personal best.
Yeah, I don't know, because she said the symphony, some of the members, they sent her a thank you card or something, and it said, "Here's to another take," which is so great. She worked for Hans Zimmer for a long time, and she did all the bunch of the Final Destination movies, which is great. And this is so wild, man. Other studios at the time, especially for kids animation, they were relying on stock music libraries. And Bruce Timm told Vulture, again, to this woman's credit, that it was Gene McCurdy who insisted that they have original compositions for each episode scored directly to the specific scenes of that episode. So Shirley, her team, and Bruce Timm would all collaborate on 11 to 15 minutes of original scoring for these episodes, and were recorded by a 30-piece orchestra.
Wow.
In scoring stages. And then for the feature-length movie that takes place in the series universe, Mask of the Phantasm, they scored that with a 100-piece orchestra and a 25-voice chorale. It's really funny. People have long wondered what this chorale is actually saying, and they are saying the names of the different people on the creative team backwards. Tim, Radomski, Burnett, and members of her composing team. And you can actually hear it. It's funny. Once you listen to it, you hear you're like, they saying Mitt? Yes, they are. She won a Daytime Emmy Award for the music director for this, 1996. And then she picked up another one in 2001 for Batman Beyond. And in 2014, ASCAP, the American Songwriting and Composers Associated, right?
Sounds right, yeah.
Because ASCAP and BMI are the two big songwriting composer guilds, or orgs. I should know this. I'm a member of BMI. They inaugurated the Shirley Walker Award to honor those whose achievements have contributed to the diversity of film and television music.
But has the Batman animated series soundtrack been enshrined in the Library of Congress, Heigl?
God willing, if my life has purpose, yes, it will be. By mine own hand.
Well, with the look and the sound of the show in place, the show's creative team began the unenviable task of casting the new voice of Batman, and also the Joker, Catwoman, and the rest of the property's cast of characters. And we say unenviable because, bear in mind, the series premiered less than 3 months after Batman Returns had hit theaters. So Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne / Batman voice was looming large in the popular consciousness. Not to mention Jack Nicholson as the Joker, Danny DeVito as the Penguin, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman,
and the rest.
Thank you. Voice director Andrea Romano told Vulture for their incredible oral history on the Batman animated series, "Just for Batman himself, I listened to 500 voices. Then we did callbacks and we auditioned 120. Bruce, Tim, and I narrowed it down to about 4 or 5 actors, none of whom we were gaga for. So I asked my roommate, he was a casting director. I said, 'Any actors you know?' And he said, 'There's this wonderful actor who has a lot of stage experience and a lot of TV and soap opera experience. And his name's Kevin Conroy.'"
Kevin Conroy, man. Long Island native Kevin Conroy received a scholarship to Juilliard after graduating high school early at the age of 17. He had a difficult childhood. His father was an alcoholic, I think a Pan Am executive. A very commonly repeated part of Conroy's bio is that he once shared an apartment with Robin Williams.
And he lived to tell the tale.
Yeah. He tweeted in 2018 that he knew Christopher Reeves from Juilliard and that those two even talked about rooming together. But Christopher Reeves, I guess, was living in Soho at the time. And Kevin Conroy said that the $200 a month it would have cost him to room with Christopher Reeves was too expensive. And they ended up with Robin Williams, where they divvied up their apartment with half-height walls to save money. So I guess it would have looked like an office cubicle thing, just like the 4-foot walls divvied up. That means that if you ascribe to the multiverse theory, there's somewhere a world where Batman and Superman were struggling actors living together in Soho.
Wow, that's a sitcom I'd like to see. I'd read that Kevin Conroy was also classmates at Juilliard with Kelsey Grammer, too, which is interesting to me for a sad reason. Kelsey Grammer had a younger sister, Karen, who was murdered when Kelsey was about 20 years old, which would have been around when he was at Juilliard. And it's believed that one of the men who was involved with the murder actually got away and was never apprehended. So I wonder if any of this somehow factored into Kevin Conroy's performance of Batman, given that he probably knew Kelsey Grammer around this time, and Batman's whole origin story about avenging his parents who were murdered in front of him. I don't know. I just think that's interesting. Did you know that about him?
About Kelsey Grammer's depressing life? Yeah, dude. It's
rough. He had to ID her himself. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah. Don't Google that one, folks.
No.
Have you seen the video where he talks about how he got the voice for Sideshow Bob?
No.
So I guess he was like a manservant, man boy Friday handyman for this blowhard stage actor when he was struggling in New York. And this guy would come home and Kelsey would be painting his cabinet or whatever. And he'd be like, "Oh, I forget the guy's name. He's actually a known guy." But he was he'd be like, "Oh yeah, hey man, how's your day? I'm just finishing up the cabinets or whatever." And the guy would go, "Oh, Kelsey."
It sounds like John Houseman.
And he goes, "Yeah, I'm going to use that later." He bookmarked that voice. It's a thing Lo and I do around the house. "Oh, Kelsey."
Wow, that's amazing. In the late 1980s, Kevin Conroy, who was gay, starred in a Broadway production of Eastern Standard, in which he played a TV producer secretly living with AIDS. And growing up closeted with a strict religious family was something that he said he brought to his audition for Batman the Animated Series. He said, "I began to speak, and a voice I didn't recognize came out. It was a throaty, husky, rumbling sound. It seemed to roar from 30 years of frustration, confusion, denial, love, and yearning." Which I think is beautiful. Kevin said he wasn't even really a fan of the comics at the time, and this was his first audition that he went on for animation work. And he said, "When I went into the audition, they asked me if I had any questions. And I said something about how I assumed they were doing the show like a 1960s Adam West Batman series." This is him talking to DC.com in a 2014 interview. And of course, the response was something like, no, that's not it at all." And Bruce Timm's talking to Vulture, he said, "We had him read both Bruce Wayne dialogue and Batman dialogue, and right out of the gate, without any direction from us, he just nailed it." And this is really interesting to me. Once he looked at the script, I guess Kevin Conroy thought that the supporting character roles, like Commissioner Gordon and one of the Gotham PD detectives, were meatier and asked to read for them instead. And the voiceover director, Andrea Romano, I guess, told him, "If you're Batman, you'll be in every episode. Stop trying to talk us out of hiring you."
There's a really beautiful comic that they did for the DC Pride anthology. It came out in Pride Month in 2022, and it just talks about how he was struggling as a closeted gay man growing up and working as an actor before he was cast as Batman, and they made it available to read for free online when he died. So it's called Finding Batman. It's really good. Kevin Conroy would ultimately voice Batman for 3 decades in nearly 60 different productions, including 15 films, 15 animated series across 400 episodes, and 24 video games. Luke Skywalker himself, Mark Hamill, who, as we'll discuss in a minute, voiced Batman's prime foil, the Joker, for the show, told Mail Magazine in their oral history of the show's first episode featuring the Joker, Christmas with the Joker, that Conroy's voice is like a massage on the back of your neck. It's so rich and textured. That episode, by the way, is where you get the classic grade schoolers chant of Jingle Bells, Batman smells, Robin laid an egg, the Batmobile lost a wheel, and the Joker got away.
I can't believe that. I just assumed that was something that was around just in schoolyards since time immemorial. I didn't know that was like, I really didn't know that was something that was from a sanctioned Batman property, first of all. Wow.
It's like Chaucer. In that DC interview, Conroy explained that since the voice director, Andrea Romano, started as an actor herself, she pushed for the voice cast to record together, which they did for almost every episode in a fashion that he likened to producing a radio play. They spent double the amount of money on an episode than was customary, he told Mail Magazine. It was a beautiful show with this timeless noir look to it, which is why it still looks so new today. There was also a big cast with 8 or 10 people in the recording studio at once and a full symphony to score each episode show. When does that happen in animation? Great question, Kevin. The 3rd episode, Nothing to Fear, features the most famous line of the show, regularly used in the advertising. "I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman." And he told Vulture, "You can't approach that as a silly line. It was Bruce Wayne talking to himself, reaffirming his own identity. It was like if I'm about to go on stage and I'm terrified and I think I'll never remember anything and I'll have a panic attack. It's Kevin Conroy saying, 'Damn it, Kevin, you are an actor. You are a good actor. You know this role. You can do this role better than anybody. Do it.'" I love that. He approached it like he was psyching himself up.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Oh, that voice. So good. There's a Frank Miller comic where he says, "I'm the damn Batman," which is really funny. Don't think they would have we'll talk about it. They probably wouldn't got away with that with standards and practices. There's also this probably irreverent anecdote to end this on, but it's so funny. He said to Vulture, he's talking about recording this, he says, in children's animation, you can't actually kill anyone. So whenever Batman beats anyone up or throws them off a cliff and they hit the ground, there's what they call the stay alive moan. So the character's not actually dead. When he was voicing a thug or whatever and somebody got punched off a building or whatever, they go, "Okay, stay alive moan." And they go, because it's like he was only grievously injured. He wasn't killed. But he keeps
going.
Only
in a coma.
Yeah. He says, they do that in the Ninja Turtles movie when the henchman beats up one of the foot guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he'll be okay.
Yeah.
So after he beats a man to death with his bare hands, they ADR a line like, oh, he's just slightly dead. He's just mostly dead. Anyway, Kevin Conroy continues, it always sounded slightly sexualized. So one episode I was doing the stay alive moan and I went, Andrea. And the place erupted. It just sounded like the most post-coital moment between Batman and Andrea Romano. She howled and said, okay, I'm taking that one home with me tonight. It got to be a tradition. Whenever I would get in a fight, it would be Andrea. And then she added to Vulture, every session I've done with Kevin, and I believe we're probably into the thousands of sessions I've done with Kevin Conroy at some point. Every time he gives me a level reading for sound, he says, he ends it with, Andrea. And so people who aren't savvy to the joke from years ago, they're scratching their heads going like, what does that mean? And anybody else who's in there like, okay, now we can start the session. It's official. Kevin has said Andrea in the Batman voice.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment. Well, outside of Kevin Conroy, the actor most connected with Batman the Animated Series is undoubtedly Mark Hamill, the voice of the Joker. Hamill actually originally appeared as an ancillary thug character in the episode Heart of Ice, which is the series' incredible introduction to the Mr. Freeze character, whom Bruce Timm originally wanted Sir Anthony Hopkins to voice.
That episode is incredible, and it really rehabbed Mr. Mr. Freeze. His name's Mr. Freeze. He sounds like an ice cream guy, but that episode is so sad. His entire motivation for being a supervillain is to cure his wife's terminal disease, and that's how he gets trapped in the Mr. Freeze suit, is that he's working on a cure for her, and that's where they got the whole Arnold Schwarzenegger storyline in Batman and Robin. It's entirely down to the animated series version of it. I mean, it's now like the definitive version of the character. And there's this, they wanted this image of the, where they were going to end this whole episode, where he's revealed to be this villain who's just trying to, cure his wife's cancer. And he has to get diamonds or something to fuel his machine. Maybe that's in the movie. But anyway, obviously he loses. And he's in Arkham Asylum. They were going to close the episode with a shot of him crying and his tears slowly turn into snowflakes and drift away. And it's like, holy shit, that is gutting for a children's animated property. And that won one of the Emmys that the show picked up. 4 Emmys the show won.
Wow.
Nice to meet you.
God. Ugh. It's pretty widely known at this point, even I knew this, that Tim Curry was originally cast as the Joker. And Bruce Timm told Vulture, everybody who came to the audition for the Joker was doing basically the Adam West era Joker actor, Cesar Romero, which is really broad. They weren't treating the character seriously. All of the actors that we tested were all doing these really silly and bizarre voices. None of it had any serious threat to it at all. And then you call Tim Curry, who we talked about in Fern Gully, who took it way too far. Bruce Timm continued, Tim Curry actually came in and gave us something really close to what we wanted. It was funny and weird, but also definitely had some menace to it. So we hired Tim. He did about 3 episodes for us, and then Alan Burnett came to me after we did the 3rd one, and we listened to the assembled tracks, and he said, I think we have to replace Tim Curry. And there have been a bunch of reasons floated for Tim's replacement. There was a claim that his performance was too scary for a children's television show, which, again, given that they said the same thing, talking about his original voice tracks for Hexus in Fern Gully, extremely plausible. But in 2017, speaking at Fan Expo Canada with Screen Geek, Tim Curry talked about this himself. He said that the reasoning was a bit more mundane. He said, I did play Joker for a while, but I had bronchitis and they fired me and hired Mark Hamill. That's life. I challenge that because they'd recorded a bunch of episodes that they had Mark Hamill do over. So they had his stuff in the vault. So why would they not?
This is a real, pitting mom and dad against each other. Who do you like more, Mark Hamill or Tim Curry?
Can you do a Mark Hamill Joker
I can't.
voice?
I
Yeah,
can't.
well, no one
I mean,
can.
I didn't want to do this or Batman because it's just like enshrined for me.
No.
Mark Hamill is genuinely terrifying. Is that?
I was very unfamiliar until earlier today, and I found some clips on YouTube of him like in the studio doing the Joker laugh, which
His entire mean just changes over. Like,
Yeah.
and as Kevin Conroy talks about, it's just like
it's really you don't want to live in that space.
And it comes from another bizarre place. Much like Batman, the animated series sprung from Tiny Toon Adventures, Mark Hamill's terrifying performance as Joker sprung from Mozart. He was telling Mel Magazine, after Star Wars, I'd gone to Broadway to take advantage of the character parts that were available there. I did the first national tour of Amadeus, and then I did it on Broadway.
I didn't know that.
But he was also a huge comics nerd, and he was reading about this show, the development of this animated series, in the Comics Buyer's Guide.
That's
which is
adorable.
Like a deeply nerdy trade publication. And he wanted to be a part of it. So he literally got his agent to call them and was like, Mark really wants to be a part of the show. And so they cast him as this business guy, evil businessman in the Mr. Freeze episode. And he told Vulture, I went in and I just let my geek flag fly. I was asking them all these questions. Are you going to do Ra's al Ghul? Are you going to do Dr. Hugo Strange? And then Andrea Romano told them, Luke. Mark pulled me aside. Poor guy, man.
Yeah, right.
Mark pulled me aside at the end of the session and said, I had so much fun doing this, and thank you for bringing me in. But I really want to be a part of the series. I don't want to just come in and guest star and disappear. So when it comes time to replace Tim Curry, they call in Mark Hamill. And initially, he didn't want to. You know, not only was there the Cesar Romero version of the character, but Jack Nicholson had just done this a few years later. People loved. So he asked to do another more minor villain. He was like, oh, could you guys maybe have me do Two-Face or Clayface or possibly a third option, also face related?
Make up a face.
Mean
Crater
face. And he also assumed that
Doll
there would
face.
be a big... What else you got? Keep developing. He also assumed that there would be a big fan backlash against having, Luke Skywalker play one of the most evil comic book villains of all time. That Killing Joke, the Alan Moore storyline, Joker shoots Commissioner Gordon's daughter and paralyzes her. That is a plot line in that comic. He's grim.
Damn.
Yeah. And I think it's in the Dark Knight Returns. He frames Batman for killing him by breaking his own neck. So this is the milieu into which Mark Hamill assumes the mantle of Joker. And so he's like, yeah, man, I didn't really think I was going to cast for this. I was going to read for it. I didn't know how people were going to react to Luke Skywalker being cast as Joker. So he says, I went into the audition thinking, well, it's too bad they can't cast me. And then he said, I'm going to make them feel really sorry that they can't.
Hell yeah.
One of the notes on the script said, don't think Nicholson. And so he mentions that I had just done Mozart and Amadeus in the tour and on Broadway, and he had this sort of ghastly laugh, is how he described it, that threw everybody.
There's an uncited quote that made the rounds when the movie version of Amadeus was released in the 80s, and it's supposedly from an acquaintance of Mozart's who said that he, quote, laughs with an infectious giddy, like metal scraping glass. But again, it's uncited, so there's a chance that might be made up.
And then he said, in retrospect, after getting that part, I asked Andrea Romano, how did I get it? What was the process? How did you know that you wanted me? And she said, the laugh. We got to punch one of those in.
Yeah, we do.
Kevin Conroy told Mel Magazine, Tim Curry had done the Joker for a few episodes before he was replaced. He's a wonderful actor, and I didn't understand why they were replacing him until I saw what Mark Hamill did with the role. Originally, I only knew Mark as Luke Skywalker, so when I heard he was coming in as the new voice of Joker, I thought, Mark Hamill? That's going to be weird. But he would just go to this crazy place with his voice, and his whole face became so rubbery.
Yeah, listeners, I beg you, I am not in any way steeped in the Bat milieu. I spent so much time this afternoon watching videos of Mark Hamill in the vocal booth. especially doing the laugh, which will haunt my dreams forever. Check it out. It's insane. I love watching the best vocal artists do their thing in the studio is so cool because their whole metabolism changes. Like it's not just something that comes from their throat. Like everything about them morphs. It's so wild. I love it.
So Mark Hamill had the challenge of working with animation that had been done to Tim Curry's recordings. So he says he wasn't really able to bring his own rhythms to the characters until they ran out of these episodes that Curry had already done, which has got to be tough, man. Imagine recording your own voice part to lip movements that have been animated around someone else's entire readings.
Well, we talked about that in Hocus Pocus too, when they got somebody to do the voice of the kid.
Cat. Yes. Yes.
Because they thought the original guy sounded too modern. Yeah, but this is where I think that Tim Curry's excuse about having bronchitis is garbage, because he'd already recorded a bunch that they decided to junk. So, yeah.
I guess that's better than I was too terrifying.
Oh, I would own that. You kidding?
That's true.
Have you all seen Hexes? Yeah, that's why.
Those of you who aren't aroused by the character will have nightmares forever. Conroy continued to Vulture. Luke Skywalker is the nice, young leading man, and most times in films, that's probably the least interesting character. Well, Mark Hamill could not be further from that. This madman came into the recording studio, and he was totally eccentric and goes a million miles an hour. The other voice cast for this show is wild. Paul, head of ASCAP and writer of Rainbow Connection Williams, was the voice of the Penguin.
Well, I didn't know that. He did a lot of weird bit parts. He had a bit part in like MASH, I think.
Adrienne Barbeau, who's a genre star. She was also the original Rizzo on Broadway, John Carpenter's ex-wife. She's in the Swamp Thing movie. She's Catwoman. Roddy McDowell.
Yeah.
Is he Dr. Zaius or no? He's Caesar.
No,
Yeah, in Planet of the Apes, he's a villain called the Mad Hatter. Ron Perlman comes in as Clayface, big old lantern jaw. Ron Perlman, Guillermo del Toro favorite, friend of the pod, Ron Perlman. David Warner, British acting icon David Warner is Ra's al Ghul, and Ed Asner, perennial New York Times crossword clue Ed Asner.
As himself.
And starring Ed Asner as himself.
Well, with the conscious attempts to push the envelope in terms of children's animation tone, the show's tone and content got a lot of notes from the higher-ups, though Bruce Timm wrote in the book on the show that some people at Fox were relatively lenient as far as that went. He said one of the unsung heroes of the series was Avery Coburn, Fox's broadcasting standards and practices liaison, he wrote. We were getting into new territory with this show, and Avery understood exactly what we were going for. She changed the rules for daytime animated series, which were long overdue for an overhaul. In past Saturday morning shows, the hero wasn't even allowed to make a fist, much less hit anyone with it. Wow.
Yeah. Some of these notes that are included in the book are just a quick sampling of them. Although there were multiple ones I omitted that included the nature of the strikes Batman were allowed to use in dealing with criminals and the points on the villain's body where he was allowed to deliver them. So that's how granular they got with this stuff. But here's a small sampling. The network says it is not their practice to show animal excrement hitting anyone on a children's show. They want us to cut the bat guano landing on Alfred's jacket. Network has a problem with Bruce's line, "I'll see you in hell."
That's great.
Penguin's joke about picking up all the soap in prison is out. The third thug must be Caucasian.
Oh, wow.
BS&P says Bane picking up Robin by the head is too easy for a kid to copy with a pet or smaller kid.
Yeah.
It has to be clear through Harley's dialogue, "I think I made a mess on your cape," that she only barfed. There's a lot to read into with that one.
Okay.
Censor wants us to figure out someplace for Catwoman to land other than on her face or breasts.
God.
They also pitched a plot line where they wanted to turn Batman into a vampire, but Fox put the kibosh on that. Another of the show's Emmys came from an episode in which Robin's parents, the acrobats, are killed in the middle of their act, and they got around this in a really, really interesting way. They obviously couldn't show it, so they have this series of shots where they're performing their act, silhouetted against a backdrop, just in black silhouette, and they swing out of frame, and then the trapezes, they swing back in. They swing back into frame with the rope severed. Just this image of them swinging back into frame, emptied, and then they cut to the crowd, like the crowd in the circus, just like aghast. It's just so artful, man. Just so much. They did so much with this show. In other words, it was a delicate bat dance.
Batman the Animated Series premiered on the Fox Broadcasting Company's children's block, Fox Kids, on September 5th, 1992, and aired in that block during weekday afternoons at 4:30 p.m. Christmas Day 1993, a very happy one for you, I imagine, because it saw the release of Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
This is the feature length. Did I say that right? Phantasm?
Yeah, Mask of the Phantasm.
Sounds vaguely obscene.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a feature length film set in the show's universe, and it contains a scene with Batman at his parents' grave that moved Andrea Romano, the vocal director, to 2 full minutes of weeping when she heard Kevin Conroy record it.
She said she had to leave the room. She was like she watched him do the take and then was like, I need some time, and like walked out of the recording studio.
But despite the emotional punch that this film delivered, it didn't do very well at the box office and failed to recoup its budget. Did you go see it? You must have been really young, I guess.
Yeah, I was 5, so no. But I remember this scaring me. Like the Phantasm is like a darker, like a gritty version of like, and just like it looks like a Grim Reaper, and they have like a scythe for like a blade for a hand. And I remember being like scared of it as a kid. A lot of this show actually did scare me. I remember being like deeply haunted by Clayface, who is this like that's the Ron Perlman character. He's an actor who was like trying to preserve his looks, and so he was he like got this experimental like something done on him, and it turns him into this giant mud monster who can change shape, but only for limited amounts of time. And during his like end scene with Batman, he like keeps changing into his past roles that he's played. And it's like, again,
that's good. That's really good.
All the like adult like stuff in this show is, and the first episode features a giant bat monster. Like, again, so good. The show's original run ended on September 15th, 1995, after 85 episodes, at which point a lot of the team then went over to Superman the Animated Series, which, again, Superman sucks. So they subsequently retooled the original animated series for the new Batman adventures, which premiered in September 1997 after the aforementioned long national nightmare of Batman and Robin being in theaters. And that film just tanked Batman in the popular consciousness until Batman Begins. Almost 10 years later in 2005, those Nolan Batmans, oh man, Joel Schumacher, may he rest in peace, really did a number. But New Batman Adventures continued to January 99 when it was replaced by Batman Beyond, which is a show about an aging Bruce Wayne mentoring a new Batman. And even though that show was a hit, it did sort of signal the death knell of the property. And this is Bruce Timm talking to Vulture. He said, "We got a call from the head of Kids WB, Jamie Kellner, and he liked what we were doing with the shows, but he wanted to figure out a way to make them even more kid-friendly."
Red flag.
Yeah. At the time, one of the big shows on WB was Buffy, and so everything he was saying was kind of moving us in that direction. Literally, at one point in a meeting, he said, "What if we made Batman a teenager?" And we all freaked out. We tried to keep a straight face because you don't want to say to the head of the WB network, "That's a really stupid idea." But we were all thinking it. Actually, at that meeting, I threw out the idea of, well, maybe if the original Batman, Bruce Wayne, got too old to be Batman, and he kind of had to pass the mantle on a young kid. And Jamie really liked that idea, and then we walked out and said, "God, what the hell are we going to do?" Again, backed into the classic corner of pitching something you don't like that your bosses do. Tim continued to Vulture, "We met with Jamie again. We pitched him our idea for Batman Beyond. Then he said, 'Great, you've got the green light. Now go make that show.' And we said, 'But what about the Batman show that we're doing right now?' And he says, 'Well, we'll cancel that one, and now you have to do Batman Beyond instead.'" So, but, you know,
ignoble end of Batman the Animated Series.
But, you know, I mean, people really love Batman Beyond. It is good, but yeah, I mean, they had a great run. And critics always loved this show. I mean, in 1992, Entertainment Weekly just called it one of the best television series of the year. And that was when Wings was on. And as the generation who grew up with it have ascended into the ranks of the halls of critical power, if you will, that reputation has only grown. IGN listed it as the best adaptation of Batman anywhere outside of the comics, the best comic book cartoon of all time, and the second best animated series of all time after The Simpsons.
Wow.
Wizard Magazine, which is probably the biggest comics magazine, ranked it number 2, the greatest animated television shows of all time, also after The Simpsons. TV Guide ranked it the 7th greatest cartoon of all time. And, you know, it's funny considering that she's one of the biggest figures in the DC cinematic universe right now. Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn. That character just comes from this show.
Really?
And the Brooklyn and the voice too. That like sort of New York Jewish Brooklyn accent that she does is that was a woman on Days of Our Lives. And apparently in one of those episodes, she was wearing like a Harley Quinn, like the classical like Harlequin Joker kind of outfit. And when Tim and Radomski were creating it, they were like, yeah, let's just bring her in and make her look exactly like that. We'll give Joker a girlfriend. And it became this Harley Quinn. It became one of the most beloved people in the Batman franchise, to the point where she's like a proper heroine now. And it all came from Batman the Animated Series. So if nothing else, we got that going for us. And, you know, again, Kevin Conroy, man, what more to say, about him? It's just amazing that he was the voice of that character for so long, for so many people who grew up with it. I don't really think it could be overstated enough that, you know, the voice of this very archetypally masculine character was an out gay man, very proud of it. And just this year has that incredible story about it that, again, I encourage everyone to go look up. And I don't have much else to say other than rest in peace, Kevin Conroy. You were the night. You were vengeance. You were Batman.
Well said.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Jordan, for putting up with this. This has been too much information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time. Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.